Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Rob Hamblen. I am founder of Leap, and I would like to welcome you to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. Actually, something you won't know about me is that I have 2 world records. Maybe I might tell you what they are. So Leap is basically the culmination of everything that I wanted to do for the last 20 years. It mixes design processes with working with awesome clients and just being able to basically enable people to be better equipped at building better products, and not just better products, but the right products. I have a strong emphasis on having a prototype in your hand. I mean, I know, Robert, you're familiar with the design sprint as well, but my mantra actually is less about the process. It's more about just giving something tangible to our clients that they can actually really appreciate, but in a much more kind of rapid time than, for example, things like design thinking. So the emphasis is more about the product and having it in their fingertips, and they're able to touch and play with it rather than kind of talk about it for a very long period of time. So Leap is basically about me working with people that I've worked with over my last 20 years and bringing kind of an elite team to come in and help people solve complex problems.
Can you dive into that a little bit more? What is it like when you do less process, but more of an emphasis on product development?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually, because one of my clients at the moment is actually on product development as well. And this has actually been a really interesting challenge because I am there as a strategy designer, and they also are obviously very conscious about my background, and obviously coming from AJ and Smart as well with regards to like process and workshops and making a really big difference. They've actually physically said to me, like, we want you to help us change the way that we work. So I've consciously been making an effort to kind of retrofit Sprint into kind of like a product execution kind of phase to help them actually develop their product. I won't say too much about the product, but it's a health product at the moment. And it has a lot of complexities which need to be broken down into lots of smaller chunks of work. And this actually is really a really kind of critical point where if you introduce like the component of a sprint to help them really understand what that next feature is likely to be, they're able to actually work out a much more kind of creative solution at a much more rapid pace. So I'm having fun kind of tweaking the process to kind of make it kind of more kind of process orientated. And, you know, I have had to make some quite significant tweaks to it. And equally also change the mindset of these people as well, because, you know, not everybody is an advocate and, you know, up for a new way of working. So there's definitely some proving that's had to have happened as well. But the good thing with Sprint as well is that you're actually able to do that very quickly. So people are kind of you know, warmed up to the idea very, very quickly when they see the results and this iterative kind of cycle that keeps happening. So yeah, it's been really good.
When you make those tweaks to the process, what's usually the situation or the context for that?
The situation is that typically when a sprint, you know, you're undertaking a sprint, there's the need for a new product. So when you're building upon an existing product, it doesn't need that kind of like that innovation phase at the very beginning, because obviously we know what the challenge is, we know what the problems that need to be solved. It's more about how we can best align all of these kind of really key people that are responsible for so many integral parts of a moving product, and work together as one. So that's probably it's more of like an alignment thing, I would say. Obviously, I'm a designer, so I'm always going to love the output of a prototype at the end of it as well. But it's more about the alignment and actually having all these people have something valid to contribute without kind of, it's like, you know, working in this harmonious kind of capacity with everybody else. So, we're working with statisticians, we're working with product designers, we're working with doctors and scientists. So they all have a valid contribution. So what I found is that the process enables everybody to have a really even contribution to kind of how this next feature can function, basically. And then we can materialize what that might look like in a much more rapid form.
How do you incorporate other methods and process into your thinking around approach and execution? Specifically, I'm thinking of things like jobs to be done and prototyping. Have you taken inspiration from either of those processes, or have you taken some of their activities and incorporated them into what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, these are all very valid and key components to kind of building products as well. Like prototyping, I was only mentioning this the other day to somebody else, and it's all about the smoke and mirrors, and less so with regards to the kind of the product that I'm working on at the moment, more so with sprints, because obviously, there's been sprints where you have to kind of, if you're making a new product, you want to test it maybe with existing products. And if you're just changing the kind of like the way that they look so people don't kind of critically judge them, that's a really good way of getting some, some honest feedback. It's all about, I would say it's all about really, you have to kind of understand what the challenge is first, who the client is, and then you kind of have this kind of tool set that you can maybe chop and change, because what's right for one product or one client isn't necessarily right for everybody. And although Sprint is a really good foundation for the general mass of people that want to innovate really, really fast and really, really quickly, there are some nuances that are that need to be kind of addressed. And I'm not going to just say that I've got all the answers to all of these questions. I'm still trying this myself, and this is actually what Leap is more enabling kind of customers and clients to do, because we have that kind of flexibility where we can kind of chop and change things a little bit to best suit their needs.
What is Leap's ideal client or engagement? Who do you best serve? Who would you best serve? Who's ideal for what the kind of work you do?
So interesting, actually, at the moment, there actually tends to be a bit of a trend with fintechs at the moment. So this is something that I've seen, especially in the last couple of years. Fintechs have a more, let's just say, they have a more kind of rushed environment where they have to kind of have something tangible. And I think sprints are actually really well suited to these fintechs because they do need to kind of really get something to market really, really quickly. So obviously you have to have the right team in place that are driving that as well. It's not just down to the sprint, the outcome, and voila, suddenly it's going to be in the App Store. There needs to be a very capable team behind that, and a very capable team that are internally good at selling to stakeholders, what the outcome of the sprint is. But I would say, generally I would say fintechs, but I don't want to kind of pigeonhole Leap's kind of offerings to just fintechs. But having, run like multiple sprints, with some global banks for AJ and Smart, and a lot of fintechs and investment platforms, there's some good experience already there. So I think that's probably why these clients feel like they're in capable hands, I guess.
So let's get in a little bit into remote working. This is something that quite literally everybody on the planet was either known about or introduced to by force because of the pandemic that we're all experiencing. What's been your history with remote working?
So yeah, good question. And this is something that is not really a shock for myself. It's actually really interesting because I've just had my intern start 2 weeks ago, and he's only ever been in a remote situation now since he's been at Leap. So this is a really interesting time. But to kind of go back to your question, the last 20 years, so I worked as a senior design manager for Qualcomm, where they had a very strong emphasis on this work-life balance, where they encouraged the teams to have partial chunks of the week where you can actually work from home. And this is going back to like early 2004, 2005, maybe even a little bit earlier. And I even worked for a much smaller company. They actually got bought out by Qualcomm called Trigenics in Cambridge in the UK. And that was one of the offerings that, when you were onboarded, they took great delight in saying that, yeah, you can have a day or a couple of days a week where you can actually just work from home. And people realized that Cambridge was quite a tricky kind of place to get to with the dreaded A14. And they were just trying to make people's work-life balance a little bit more easier. And also as well, the other thing was that, even when we were in the office, they were very relaxed on, being in at 10 a.m. and leaving at 5, because they knew that, when we were working from home, typically, we would want to work longer days because we had more, kind of like laser focus, as Jake would say. You can have much less interruptions, it's much more productive. So Qualcomm were very, very good at kind of this work-life balance and working remotely. And, I would just say the thing that's probably got easier is the technology. Nowadays, as you probably can appreciate this as well, that, there's so many amazing tools to collaborate online. It's just easier, and obviously not just the tools, but the bandwidth you're able to kind of offer in as well. So, yeah, there's the internet is far more capable these days to kind of meet every need or demand that we should have. And so that was Qualcomm. And then when I was a freelance design consultant, when I used to work for Vodafone and Deutsche Telekom, there were big chunks of time where actually the guys would just say, yeah, Rob, it's fine. At that time, I was living in the south of France and commuting to either London or in Bonn or Darmstadt. And, the guys that I was working with were, there obviously is like a phase where you prove yourself as a designer and, you build this trust, which is the kind of like the biggest, I would say one of the biggest emphasis on working from home. And they would just say, yeah, like just come in every other week, or at some point after like 6 months of a contract, they would just turn around and say, oh, just come in like 3 days a month. So working from home was something that they were geared up to do back in like early 2012, 2014. This is just something that those companies were just expecting from their designers.
Do you think we're going back? Meaning, do you think that we're going to go back to the world where there's going to be physical in-person meetings the majority of the time versus getting together in a remote virtual environment like this?
Yeah, interesting. I think people will actually appreciate in-person meetings a lot more. I think this is the good thing that's happening at the moment. I mean, it's a dreadful situation, obviously, but there have to obviously be some good things. And I think one of the good things that will come out of this will be that people will just not take for granted quite so much of what they did before. So this is why I was saying that when you do have in-person meetings, I think maybe people might be a bit more conscious of not wasting people's time quite so much, because they know how kind of tedious it can be, when you're having like a Zoom meeting, for example. Mm-hmm. And I think there'll just be this embracing this kind of like, okay, this is how it can be and this is how it should be. But I think the takeaway from it will be that it's much more acceptable to have more remote meetings, because I think it suits people a lot more and it suits the convenience of everybody. And, the world is a small place, these days. There's teams are spread, completely across the globe. And, for the most part, a lot of these companies do operate with some, kind of remote kind of like, frequency to their meetings. And that's still going to continue. And I think, if anything, it will be probably the smaller companies that are less reluctant to kind of do something like this, remote setup. I think it will enable them that they can actually function with a bit more flexibility in future.
I think the script is going to be flipped. For a long time, you had, for companies that weren't remote first or didn't emphasize that option, you had people who were doing the hands-on work asking their managers, directors, to have more time to work it from home for whatever reason. Now, after this experience that I think is going to probably last till the end of the year, with companies strapped for cash, literally trying to rebuild their businesses from a devastating loss of like anywhere from 2 quarters of no activity, they're going to be looking to cut costs and look to do things on the cheap. Yeah. And remote work has that option to it. You already have a trained workforce. And I think that there's going to have to be that conversation about why do we need to meet in person when the business can't afford to do that.
Yeah. And I think you're right as well, because, and this was also happening this has been happening in the last couple of years as well. And I don't know whether because it's been in like a sprint environment, but we've had conversations with people for the last 3 years, and remote has bubbled up so much because it has been a more cost-effective and more efficient way of running a sprint. There was a really great one actually back in the AJ and Smart days when we nearly had to go to Hawaii for a sprint. And in the end, this is such a funny story because it was like one of those moments where it was like, we all wanted to go, but then we realized that how much we were going to get squeezed by jet lag to then run into the next sprint the following week. And it was actually the sprint team. We all just went, it's just not worth it. We should just do this remotely. It was just like an absolute no-brainer. So, and it tends to be more from like, I would say the Silicon Valley startups that they feel like there's less pressure to kind of, if they are, if they're starting up this new product, then obviously, they're trying to save costs as much as they can. And, if it means that they don't have to pay for 4 flights transatlantic, then that's obviously a massive saving as well. They can re-inject that into the actual product itself. So it does make a lot more sense. So yeah, some of those conversations were bubbling up already, but I think you're right. I think, moving forward, it's in the next year, people are going to be like really tightening their belts with regards to their expenditure and, how their companies operate. And this is just a great way for them to be able to do that and to not slow down on any operation stuff. So
in 2020, what does a typical designer need to kind of have as a foundation for doing the kind of work we do in, like, say, design sprints?
They need to have read the book for a start. They have to know sprint, like they have to know process. They have to know, for so many years, I knew many designers who were very reluctant to kind of almost acknowledge process would make them more efficient designers. So I think this is something that if I were to start my career all over again, I would literally use sprint right from the beginning. I think it's such a powerful book for designers. And I know a lot of designers feel like it compromises their creativity because, Jake is a big, tall person. He's a big kind of speaker, and that, you don't have to be a creative person to be, to contribute to this process. And I think the minute designers hear that, they feel like they're being kind of made obsolete because this process is going to just kind of make products for them. And it's not like that at all. It really isn't. And like, there's so many designers I've had this conversation with where actually you can draw so many parallels from sprint. Like, you pick up a pen, you use a Sharpie, you're doing a concept first, and then you go into the prototyping phase, and then you make it. These are the key kind of underlying principles of being a really good designer. And throughout my whole career, I've had conversations with like young designers, that are just coming through their degrees now. And, the computer now, the laptop and the internet, it enables you to move so fast. And for a very long period of time, these designers feel like they can just go straight to the computer and, go to the noun project, pick up an icon, whatever. They're missing a valuable component, which is like what their brain can use to solve for this challenge. And then how they can visually interpret that and then creatively come up with something. And then maybe find an icon from the noun project that is something more akin to kind of what their vision was. So the sprint is really good because it means that your, Sharpie to Post-it to pad or whatever, it's kind of giving you those underlying key skills as a designer that you should be executing on anyway. And the whole process is almost like, it's like a mini project anyway. So it's just a really great way for designers to kind of embrace and to also kind of have very good conversations with really senior people that are driving those products. It kind of gives the designers a bit more credibility in that respect as well, because they do understand the business as well as just drawing and coming up with, designs.
So if I heard you correctly, it sounds like you're saying it's less about the technique and the tools, but it's more about the conversation around the design and what it means to different people.
Yeah, I think, there's so many times, like actually going back to one of the fintechs, for example, when I was doing this particular sprint for this fintech, I really wanted to have banking conversations with these bankers. And, with the sprint on this occasion, we had to go to Canary Wharf in London. So, we were at, floor 28 or something of that tower, which is not that high in American standards, but for the UK, that's kind of near the top. And there was a lot of pressure on the team and us to kind of have conversations that were meaningful with these bankers, and to kind of have an understanding of the product and the challenge that they were having. I didn't want to just go in there and be a designer and have just this kind of very like high level conversation without really understanding. And I think the sprint actually enables everybody to kind of be privy to conversations that are kind of key to kind of executing for a product, and with the experts that are driving that product as well. So many times, in my past where, I've been briefed by a creative director or briefed by a product owner, you're only hearing kind of like one side of that argument or one side of that challenge. Whereas the sprint is kind of it's baking in literally everybody who's in that room into like the hard facts and the business language and the key deliverables and, the actual challenge itself, so that they can really understand that. And metrics as well, like, metrics are a very key component to actually realizing whether the product you're making is actually going to work or not.
That's a very important point, because metrics move the needle with a lot of people. When they see data, when they see real evidence to suggest that something they're doing is working, that usually shortcuts the conversation around opinions.
And for me as well, that's what also drives the accountability as well. This is the other good thing about sprint, is that everybody who's in a sprint, they are accountable for this product. And if you get really senior people involved, then this is like a point of no return. This is where actually they are taking this so seriously. They have a vested interest in, you see corporations come through the door and they're running a sprint. They are owning it like it's a startup, and like it's like their life and their being that it's going to be for the next like 2 or 3 years. So accountability is a big player.
Where do you think design sprints are going?
I was going to say, if I knew the answer to that, I should have started my own company. I know this is a kind of funny I think they're going to be around for a long time. They might change in that period of time. This is one of those things where, like design thinking's been around since like the 70s, and, it's still around now, and it's evolved, and it has to evolve, sorry. So I think design sprints will be around for a long time. Certainly for our generation of, the design for the next 15 years or so. But I think it's how companies will adapt the design sprint. It just might mean that there's more kind of internal kind of drive from companies to kind of run their own design sprints. We can see this already starting to happen. So one thing I will say, and that was when I came up with Leap, I was very conscious to not name my company around a process, because I want Leap to stand for many things, and it's more about the action of how a client can kind of move forward with their challenge and their vision, rather than about the process that kind of gets them to that vision. So I think they'll be around. I'm already kind of tweaking to a degree, and kind of seeing what I can kind of pull in and kind of push into this kind of process to kind of make it a little bit more kind of business orientated as well. So, but fundamentally it will be a sprint. And, as you know, like I worked for AJ and Smart for nearly 3 years.
You used to work at AJ and Smart? I did not know that.
So, I'm a big advocate of that process, the AJ and Smart sprint. And, this is something that, is something that I'm also kind of pushing forward with regards to, the 4 days over the 5 days. I don't see a problem with the 5-day one. I just think it's easier on stakeholders' kind of shoulders to kind of commit to 2 days rather than, a longer period of time. And for me, I've seen kind of the reactions from people firsthand with regards to, the success in kind of getting those people in that room for 2 days, with the AJ and Smart sprint.
I'm of the opinion that we're now in the phase of it going completely custom. and I'm seeing it in the wild all over the place.
Yeah.
I just got off a phone with a major company, and their entire design team is, I've been consulting with them on virtual design sprints. And based on those conversations, they've literally taken apart the design sprint process and now spend maybe 6 hours together online in 1 week, and the rest of it's offline.
Yeah.
They integrate it with existing process on both the dev and the design side with other organizations. They're literally taking the culture and the context in stride with this methodology and creating their own methodology around how they get their work done. This is commonplace, and it's probably going to be more so this year in terms of how people take what's already there as a recipe since it's been there for the past 4 years and make it their own in ways that they feel is appropriate.
I mean, I see pros and cons in this all the time. And, actually the topic of this conversation, is not a new one also, because, this is something that for the last 3 years, we were always encountering people that were, doing their version of sprint. And one of the things I will say though, is that, like, for me, it's not a sprint if you do not do the user testing. And it's not a sprint if you do like the rapid prototyping. I've been asked this so many times, like, oh, like, what if we spend a week kind of making the prototype? Well, then you're not really kind of making a prototype or a prototype. You're just creating a product, and you're too heavily invested in it already to then think about maybe changing it. So there's a definite kind of secret recipe for the rapidness and kind of making that prototype in a very short period of time, because it means you're not precious about it. As a designer, you shouldn't be. And, you shouldn't be one of those designers that, is like, going for pixel perfect precision and the end product, that can't be changed. You should be looking at like, hey, how can we improve this? And to do that is to just detach yourself from it. And you can only do that by creating something so very, very quickly. There's always time later on down the line with regards to kind of like how much time and love you want to put into something. But I would say that's one of the critical components. And the map, I also want to draw your attention to that one as well, because I think from our experience, certainly running sprints, the map has been the most challenging component for probably not us, but for the client to kind of get their head around. And I'm trying to think when it was now. Selfishly, I started to kind of pre-draw the map before the sprint would happen, because I didn't want that weight on my shoulders. So this is going back to like early 2018. Where I started to actually preload the sprint by having the map already drawn. And then what that would mean was, we'd either go to the sprint with magic paper and the map already drawn, or I would just draw it very quickly whilst we were, setting the room up, for example. And the same emphasis was still that you could still change it and, get the client team to kind of contribute to it. But it just meant that so much of the heavy lifting was already taken out of that exercise. And, people could kind of go, oh, great, this is already done for us. But maybe this is missing. And, sometimes we'd miss really obvious things off on purpose just so that they would feel included about kind of saying, oh, yeah, what about this component? And then, how it works as a facilitator, you can then turn around and go, oh, yeah, that's a really great, obvious suggestion. Thanks very much. And it kind of lowers the barriers for people wanting to contribute. So there's all these kind of tactical exercises you can do with the clients while they're there to help them feel included. But what I will say on a positive note is that, do you know what? If people are adapting it and making it work for them, and they are running sprints, Jake must just be going, that's brilliant. My job is done, because it's not saying that it's set in stone and it should be this. It's just saying that this is just one way in which you can kind of get products to market much faster. But it's only when you don't start to do the user testing, that's when it's not really a sprint, because then you're just having product designers with their egos and opinions building the products that they think these people should have. So that's probably my only contribution with that. And I welcome change. Like I'm guilty of it myself. I still want to kind of like base it on the 4-day sprint from AJ and Smart, but I also want to kind of add kind of like more business modeling to it, for example. Just some way in which, if it is a brand new product that's coming out of Silicon Valley, to kind of really understand whether they actually are innovating and whether it does affect their business model, or whether they're just changing some of one side of their product offering, basically.
Have you ever seen the presentation Paul Adams did at ClearLeft 2019, I believe? It was called The End of Navel Gazing.
No, I've not heard of that.
It's on Vimeo, and It was the inspiration for writing an article about UX a long time ago, about a couple of years ago. So it must have been 2018, where he had the view that people look at a product or a service in a different way depending on where they are in the company. And their propensity to get something out in front of the customer is different based on where they are. So sales wants to put something out immediately, even if it's unfinished.
Yeah.
Marketing wants something that's 50-50, where they still have something that they can, write words against, write effective copy, be able to put campaigns to. And then the third level is the designer, researcher, like product team, where they want to get it as close as possible to a working product so that it's user tested, it's validated, and so on. And what he found is that within the company-wide, you would figure that there would be something along the lines of the third tier, but it was actually somewhere between the first and the second. And probably if there's in times of getting something out the door to meet like if they're a publicly traded company, then it's the first tier. So they just want to get it out in front so they can make the headline, and then they figure out the details later.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to have that kind of view, because you're right that you should have something that's going to give you decision insurance around what you're going to be producing. But in most businesses, and it's going to depend on the industry, there's always that mad rush to get something out there to, make headlines or to put an impression with the right people.
Yeah, or just to hit the space first. They don't want to be the who remembers the second people, typically, isn't it? That's kind of the critical component.
So if people want to find out more about Leap and what you're all about, where should they go online?
They can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me at Be The Leap. I'm pretty much posting everything that we're doing, and it's kind of my journey in kind of building this small company. And obviously, the interesting component is that obviously we're in interesting times now. And I had an amazing 2 months to get Leap started, to the point where I'm not kind of 100% relaxed, but I'm pretty relaxed because we had such an amazing kind of amount of momentum to kind of announce Leap and get it started. And I already have Ballant, my prototyper, as an intern. He's helping me with some amazing design work as well. So it's basically Instagram is the best place to just follow me kind of making, and this is our journey, and this is our journey kind of creating Leap. I also have a pretty strong presence on LinkedIn, and if you want to just get in touch, you can either find me on LinkedIn, or you can go to our crappy website, which was made in about 4 hours. This is on our hit list of things to kind of update in a next few months. So there's lots of work to be done for sure. But I wake up every day with a smile, even at the moment, like in the world the way it is. It's worrying times for sure. But just to kind of have some control over, like maybe we can change products, or maybe we can customize products as well. This is what it's all about. It's all about just giving our clients what they need and, educating them along the way.
And last question for you, Rob. What's the long-term goal of Leap?
Long-term goal of Leap is, I've got some pretty good client signings already. So I would like to just build something that people know globally is like a center of excellence for kind of making really solid products and really like successful products as well. And just the people that work there are really passionate about kind of creating, the best of the best.
Very nice. Rob, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert, as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. From July 27th to the 31st, we're going to be debuting a new process called the Dash. It is a hybrid of design thinking, design sprints, and prototyping, the process to find out desirability in the market, pioneered by Alberto Savoia. If you're interested in getting involved with that, send me an email at robert@dallasdesignsprints.com and let me know that you heard it on the podcast. Until then, stay safe, keep your distance, wash your hands, wear a mask, and take care of you and yours. Okay? Stay safe. Bye-bye.